Okay, so we're going to start now from the beginning of Chavruta part 2. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. So again, what we have here, again, we'll go through the structure, okay, because I want to deal with content and going in depth, but I also want to deal with basic structural things. Rav Yehuda was a second generation Emora, and he often passed down, he first studied with Rav. When Rav died, he moved to Shmuel, and he passes down the Torah of Rav and Shmuel, who were really the first main Emoraim that exist. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, he says 4 things. Arba'a kosot halalu, number 1. Tzarich sheyeh bein kedei mizigat kos yafeh. That's what we described before, which we're going to see exactly what this means, but it sounds like there has to be that when you pour a cup, you end up with a nice cup of wine. Sheta'an chai yatsa. Sheta'an bevat achat yatsa. Okay, now this is a good example of how you know how to punctuate, because every line ends with the word yatsa. So you see the word yatsa repeats itself a number of times. So you know that yatsa either has to be the first word in the line or the last word in the line. So in this case, since we're trying to it's giving us halachot, yatsa means you fulfill your obligation. So therefore, at the end of every line, it's going to say yatsa, and then we'll put a period. So sheta'an cha yatsa. If one drinks them without diluting them, you're yotze, meaning you fulfill your obligation. Sheta'an bevat achat yatsa. If you drink them all at once, which we'll have to see what that means, yatsa. Hishka mehen lebanav ulibnei beito yatsa. If he gives from his wine to people in his family to drink, he's also fulfills his obligation. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, number 1, he defined exactly how much wine. And then he said 3 cases where it sounds like you're not doing things in the ideal manner, but you fulfill your obligation anyway. To which we all of a sudden start to say, wait a minute. This isn't going to be as clear as we think. Rabbi Yehuda said this in the name of Shmuel, but come other rabbis and they limit what he says. And they say it's not exactly fully true what you said. It's not that they disagree, but they limit it. And they say that's only true partially. Probably they heard this and they said that can't possibly be the case. It's something, sometimes when people think things sound so preposterous, it encourages them to say, we don't disagree with you, but you must not have been giving us the full picture. So now we're going to learn that you can, and this happens in many situations, you can fulfill your obligation, but not fully. Okay? So that's what's going to happen here. And from there, we start to learn that there's different elements here to the 4 cups of wine, which we, by the way, last time when we learned about reclining and we said there's possibly a difference between the first 2 and the last 2, we already got this sense that there might be different elements to the drinking of the wine at the Seder. So the question between the Rif and the regular, our version, is going to be how many different elements are there? So Sheta'an cha yatsa amar Rava. So the first limitation is going to be Rava says Yidei yayin yatsa, Yidei cherut lo yatsa. You're going to fulfill your obligation of wine, but you're not going to fulfill your obligation of freedom. Sheta'an bevat achat. So what about this one? Rav amal Yidei yayin yatsa, Yidei arba'a kosot lo yatsa. You're going to fulfill your obligation of wine, but you're not going to fulfill your obligation of arba kosot, of drinking 4 cups. Now, if I had said to you, okay, what are you talking about? Isn't wine 4 cups? And isn't this all about feeling like you're free men and women, and what's going on here? Why are we having, what's 4 cups? What's freedom? What's wine? What are all these terms? We don't really know right now. So lo yatsa mehen. Now this is, arba kosot lo yatsa. Last line, before we move on to understand this more in depth, is the case about ishka mehen lebanav ulibnei beito yatsa. If you give to your children to drink or your family members, you fulfill your obligation. So again, limiting this, right? Each time we get a quote from what Rabbi Yehuda said, and then we limit it. And this is as long as he drinks the majority of the cup. Okay, there's actually a debate about, I'm not going to get into this. It's not our topic really. I mean, it is, but there's a lot of things we could get into. I wanted to limit it, but there's a debate about whether he gave this to other people in his family who are also obligated. And what does this come to teach you? That other than what we do today, which is everybody has their own cup, right? Normally on a regular Friday night, one person has a cup and everybody drinks some of it. But if you say that the people he's giving to drink are other people who are also obligated, it sounds like not everybody has their own cup of wine. But some people read this that no, he's giving to his sons who are young, who aren't obligated. And then what's the Gemara teaching you? Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak is telling you, as long as you drink the majority of the cup, because that you have to do to fulfill your obligation, you can give to your other children, you can give to your children some of your cup to drink. So there's two different ways to understand what that means. Okay, now I want to go into, so here's a chart. Okay, I filled it in also while you were doing chavruta. Okay, so here's the chart of what we just did, what I just went through. And now I want it, right? This is why I particularly wanted to show you that according to Shmuel, right, you fulfilled your obligation, but then each time a different rabbi came and limited each statement. But now we have the version in the Rif. And the Rif, so our version has wine, not freedom. Wine, not 4 cups. But the version in the Rif is different. The Rif says if you drank them undiluted, you fulfilled 4 cups, but you didn't get freedom. And if you drank them all at once, you fulfilled freedom, you didn't fulfill 4 cups, which is very interesting because he doesn't have any issue. Wine is not a factor at all, okay, which we'll discuss in a minute what wine means. And it seems like you do get freedom. In this case, you don't get 4 cups. In the other case, if you drank them undiluted, you do fulfill your obligation of 4 cups. So what are these concepts? Wine, freedom, 4 cups, right? What does this all mean? So let's start with wine. Tosfot, if you got to read it in number 3, Tosfot says, what is wine? Perush yidei simchat Yom Tov. Okay, that's your classic. Every Yom Tov, you're supposed to, right, drink wine. So now he says something very interesting. Again, Tosfot keeps referencing things that somebody must have said, and he's trying to say, I don't agree with this, okay? So he says, you might have thought, Ho'il v'tiknu arba kosot, lo nafik midei simchat Yom Tov, elam ken yatsa yidei arba kosot. Okay, what does this mean? This is a fascinating line. What he's saying is, when you're sitting on Sukkot, how many cups of wine do you need to drink? 1 to fulfill your Simchat Yom Tov, right? You're sitting on Shavuot, 1 cup of wine. But on Pesach, since there's an obligation of 4 cups, maybe you don't fulfill your Simchat Yom Tov unless you have 4 cups. And what this is coming to tell you is, no, there's something entirely different. And this goes back to what we discussed the very first class. I'm trying to connect all the things that we're learning, which is that the Seder night is made up of different elements. It's got elements that have to do with regular Yom Tov. So if you drink this wine without diluting it, or you drink it all at once, you haven't fulfilled the special mitzvot of Pesach night. But this is our version of the Gemara. But you have fulfilled your obligation of Simchat Yom Tov because you drank a cup of wine. So you didn't dilute it. Okay, it didn't taste as great, but you drank wine. You can, make a little check, right? I did that. So he's saying that that's something not connected with specifically Seder night. It's something that has to do with all Simchat Yom Tov. And there's not like there's a unique obligation of Simchat Yom Tov on Seder night includes 4 cups. But each of these cases, though, you didn't fulfill the other elements, right? So what are the other elements? Now, what's interesting about this is that the Rif doesn't think that that's even a factor, right? The Rif thinks, no, you can even be Yotze, some of the unique aspects of Seder night, if you drank it undiluted, so you still fulfilled it. As long as you drank 4 cups, you fulfill your obligation of 4 cups. And if you drank it all at once, you still drank enough wine that you would theoretically, let's just call it, you could get a little tipsy, a little drunk. That will fulfill your obligation of feeling like a free person, even though you drank it all at once, so you didn't fulfill 4 cups. So we have 2 elements here. So let's just discuss those 2 elements. We have 4 cups. Now, what's the idea of 4 cups? And this goes back to what I said. The Mishnah organizes when do we drink all the 4 cups? And we drink them at specified times throughout the Seder. And this is kind of a symbolic process that we go through during the Seder. As we said the other day with the maror and the matzah, and everything is this symbolic acts that we're doing to recount what had happened. And it's part of the recounting of the story. And the story has different elements to it and different parts of how we do the story. And therefore the cups come to frame that. But when you talk about freedom, you're talking about experiencing something like they did, right? And that's an experiential thing. And for that, you can't drink undiluted wine because you're not experiencing the feeling of freedom by drinking undiluted wine. No free person would go drink that disgusting, concentrate. So that's not undiluted wine. If you drink it all at once, so you've done that because you've drunk a lot of wine. But what haven't you done? You haven't gotten that idea of the night and the framing and the process. Okay, so you're missing that element. Okay, so there's different elements. Again, I'm giving it one sort of definition of symbolic versus experiential. There might be other ways to understand that, but that's the basic difference. Now I want to just point out this machloket Rashbam and Rashi about what bevat achat is. This isn't the main issue. That's why I wanted to not focus on it too much. But bevat achat sounds like you drank them all at once. What does it mean all at once? It sounds like you drank 4 cups, but you drank them one right after the other. And because of that, you didn't do it in the order that the Mishnayot tell you, right? You're supposed to do 1 for Kiddush, 1 over the story of the telling of the story, 1 at Birkat Hamazon when you bench, and 1 at Hallel. You didn't do that, so it's, that's his issue. Okay, and that's why he says you didn't fulfill 4 cups. But Rashi says you actually put them all into 1 cup. He thinks that you put all your wine into 1 cup. You drank it over the course of the night. So you drank it in the right place, but it was only in 1 cup. And he said that's a problem if you had them all in 1 cup, because there's a significance, according to Rashi, of actually having 4 separate cups. Okay, and basically the Rashbam, he doesn't like his answer because he says 1 cup can never be considered 4 cups. You could have, right? Think about people at the Seder. Sometimes some people have small cups, some people have gigantic cups, but you still call that a cup. You wouldn't call that 4 cups that you put all together into 1. Nobody would ever say that. So the Rashbam thinks it's not really a good interpretation. Okay, now we're going to go on to the next section of the Gemara. The next section of the Gemara, it's not so easy to figure this out, but the next section of the Gemara refers back to the first line that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel about this Kedei Mezigat Kos Yafeh. And the way you can figure this out is really by the continuation. Sometimes in the Gemara, you have to read on, and only when you read on do you understand what's going on. Meitive. It happens to me when I prepare all the time, where I'm reading and I don't understand something, and I sort of get stuck on it, and I think, and I'm just, it's like bashing your head against a wall, you're not getting anywhere. And then sometimes let me just read on a little, and then it all of a sudden makes sense. Sometimes it's like a question I have, which the Gemara then has, because it doesn't make any sense. Sometimes they suggest things and then there's some issues with it. Anyway, the trick is always just keep going on and then go back. So meitive, if you remember, we already met this word, and it's good to repeat these words. Meitive is we're going to bring a question from a Tanaitic source. So the next word is going to be a quote from a source from the time of the Tanaim. Okay, a Mishnah, a Braita, Tosefta. And then it's going to question something an Amora said, which in this case will be Rav Yehuda, who said in the name of Shmuel. They have to have how much? A quarter of a log. Okay, a log was a measurement. Quarter of a log was a classic cup of wine. Okay, I don't know. Some people are crazy, right? And I mean, you have to be crazy to do this, but there's this is exactly, it comes from here. There's a special shi'ur of how much wine you need. You have to check that your cups have that much wine. Okay, there's a debate about how big a revi'it is. Okay, there's always differences of opinion about requisite shiurim. Okay, and there's all these debates about it. But in any case, it says Kedei she'eh behem revi'it. Echad chai, echad mazug, whether it's diluted or undiluted, whether it's chadash or yashan, new or old wine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, tzarich she'eh bo tam u'mar'eh yayin. It has to also have the taste of wine and the look of wine. We're going to get back to this at the very end. Katane mihat. So now here, okay, now you know the Braita ends. How do you know the Braita ends? Because we switched to Aramaic. So you know already we're not in Braita land anymore because they didn't speak Aramaic generally in the times of the Mishnah. So now they're telling you, Katane mihat means we already said, right? It says in this Braita, it's like taking which words are important to us. Sometimes they quote a Braita and they assume you understand what the contradiction is. Sometimes it's not so clear. So they're kind of pulling out the words that they want to tell you. Kedei revi'it. It says you need a revi'it of wine. Va'at amar. That means, Rav Yehuda, you said in the name of Shmuel, kos yafeh. That's, wait a minute. Is it revi'it or is it a kos yafeh? Okay, now there's different ways to interpret why this is. Either there's different ways of describing. One is saying you need a significant cup, which sounds very subjective. And Kedei revi'it sounds incredibly objective. It's exactly a measurement like this. Some explain it in other ways, but I'm going to stick with that right now. So what do they answer? In fact, it really means one and the same. They don't contradict. Okay, when we bring a contradiction on an Amora from a Braita, there's all different options of how we can do it. We could say, the Amora can say, I'm wrong. He can say, I have a different Tana to hold like. In this case, he's basically saying there's no contradiction. They're really one and the same. My kedei mezigat kos yafeh de ka'amar. What does that mean? Okay, the assumption is because they thought meant normally, again, if your cup is to have a revi'it. A revi'it is a quarter of a log. How much wine do you need of the undiluted wine? You need a quarter of a log. So kedei mizigat kos yafeh, some people think it means you need only a quarter of a log, because you need enough wine that if you were to pour water in it, that's how much you would need. But in the end, they say, no, it means you need the quarter of a log, the quarter of a log of the very concentrated wine. And then you have to add to that enough water to get up to a revi'it altogether, right? You end up with a revi'it of a log. And that's basically the exact same thing as saying kedei revi'it. So there's no contradiction. This part of the Gemara is not super interesting. What I really wanted to bring this is to highlight this issue of a meitive, where we bring a braita to contradict an amora, and then we bring a resolution. And there's all different types of resolutions. And this resolution is they really mean one and the same. Okay, the very last part for today is Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, now, what do? We just quoted in this braita, the second part of the braita was Rabbi Yehuda says it needs to have ta'am and mareh yain, the taste and the look of wine. So now the Gemara says, Amar Rava, my time of Rabbi Yehuda. Where does he get this from? What's his proof? Dichtiv al tera yain ki et adam. This means don't look at wine because it's red, because it gets red. And this shows you that wine is red. Okay, now it's a very strange verse. I'm going to tell you why it's a strange verse. The first thing I wanted you to see is how to find where this verse is. Okay, it's hard to see it here. Let me see if I can make this bigger. But you can see here, I want to show you. I can make this much bigger. And now this goes, there's a little letter. Here, let me try to move. I don't know why it's on the side of my screen here. Okay, so right next to that verse, there's a little number there, okay? In different Gemaras, it's a little bit different, but that number leads to here, Torah or Hashalem, and it tells you can find this pasuk in Mishlei. Anytime the Gemara quotes a pasuk, the Torah or tells you where you can find this pasuk, and if you have a good version of the Gemara, they even quote the whole verse for you here. Now, what's interesting about this verse is that this verse is a verse that's a very negative verse, and it basically says, stay away from wine because wine will lead you to do terrible things. It's such a funny verse that they're using here when they're trying to tell you, here's this really important mitzvah, and we want you to do it right, and we want you to do it with the best wine possible, which is the red wine. And this is why people are careful to have red wine at Leil Seder, even though maybe for Kiddush you wouldn't use red wine. But they're using this verse that's in such a terrible connotation about someone who's off the track, and is drinking wine and is using it for bad things. And it's just very interesting that this is what they're doing. And maybe I don't really have a good answer for this. You can come up with your own answers. It's food for thought, or wine for thought. But it's interesting to think about that they're using this verse of negative behavior, right? When we just talked about all these positive elements of wine. We're using wine for symbolism. We're using wine to show freedom. And maybe it's kind of warning you almost that, there's a fine balance here, because they are telling you to drink 4 cups of wine. I mean, my family, they always make fun of me because after I start with the second cup, I already start getting giddy and tipsy, and, it doesn't do me well. Let's put it that way. But it's very interesting to see that they're maybe they're somewhat addressing this, that, well, you also have to be careful with wine. So it's just an interesting way that they end the sugya. I don't have too much to say about it. There's actually also a debate about whether that verse is trying to prove color, or it's also trying to prove color and taste. It's a debate about how to read it, which again, just shows you that you can read any text and you can start breaking it up into lots of pieces and saying, oh wait, this is only proving color, because the pasuk really says, Al tera yain ki et adam, which is all about adom, the color. Other people saying, no, it means wine that gets you drunk. That's good tasting wine. And that's really telling you both good tasting wine and red. Okay, and it has to be the best quality wine. So again, what we see today, we saw different structures. We had some experience trying to figure out how to punctuate, right? Picking up on key words that teach you how to punctuate. How, when they bring how sometimes they could take a statement and then they limit it. How we have contradictions and how they resolve contradictions from earlier sources against people who are speaking in the Gemara. How to find psukim when they quote a pasuk, how you know where to find that verse. And then about this concept about what exactly, using all these examples, these extreme examples, how we get to understanding what the idea is behind the law, right? What's this idea about the 4 cups? And obviously the issue about where do women fit into this whole thing. So with that, we will stop for tonight. We'll open it up for questions.